Hello, and welcome back to our 10-minute product podcast. Hello, Jonas, and
Hello,
thanks for
Christian.
being here. And we had a last episode about AI, which types of AI you could use, that the importance of the use cases is paramount, where you need to figure out what you want to achieve or solve. And we announced that we'd do the next episode, which is this one, about what technologies you have, what methods you have. How do you make it happen in your company once you've decided what are the things that you want to tackle? And so we discussed this with you, Jonas, a little bit beforehand. We would like to cover both: should you buy, should you build, should you rent, and then also the aspect of how should you structure this within your company in order to make the AI project successful? Because we keep reading things such as, well, companies have tried AI, a lot of the projects fall flat, and now they have to backtrack. So how could you approach this in a safer way, or in a more in a way that enables more successes along the road, basically? So let's kick off. Jonas, you are the expert of buy, build, rent. Put it together. How would you start?
It's a good question, right? Because now you got your idea or you got your use case, and you want to kind of start executing on that and start implementing some software solutions to it. And there's kind of a plethora of options you can go for, and just to give you kind of the span of options as we see them is that from one end, there's kind of the option that you could go in and you can buy or acquire the IP required to build the solution. So, the intellectual property in this regard
Yeah.
is either the knowledge in terms of people, you buy a company with a team of people, or you buy the software that the IP represents, and you kind of plug and integrate and plug that in. The other option is that you could build it yourself. That entails that you need to, if you don't have them today, you need to hire people. This requires specialist knowledge. So you need to hire people. That's got to lead in. You need to get them established and so forth. There's some consequences of that. Uh, Thirdly, you could go out and rent it, as in you could buy it as a service from a provider that fits your need. There's ups and downs with that regard. You kind of don't uh, kind of gain the knowledge of operating this particular type of technologies yourself internally by renting it out in town. Um, and however, on the time to market, it kind of gives you an upside because in many cases you can kind of plug and play, given the availability of AI services out there today and the kind of abstraction level that we're working with these days.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and then just to add the fourth and last one, which is to borrow uh, your solution. And borrow, what does that mean? It could be, if you were part of a group, like a group of companies in a global setting, that maybe another company within that group that has a specialist knowledge, or you can do partnerships as to do joint ventures with not direct competitors, but uh, a, a partner where you have a mutual interest and you have some synergies across and you each add value to that partnership. That's a fourth option as well. A bit more rare, but you can kind of see that as well.
Super interesting. So I've seen a couple of cases, just to go into concrete examples, where companies wanted retrieval mostly, and so I'm talking about a legal company. They didn't want to go immediately into things such as, hey, find me loopholes in the contracts, or figure out if there's a chance of litigation against our client, or they didn't want any of the advanced sort of questions at first. They said, look, we're happy with retrieval, and just to be able to fetch data and look up data from all our knowledge base that we have. And so in their case, a RAG, a fine tuning was what they needed. However, they could have rented. However, they needed absolute confidentiality. Even if a big company, for example, rents, private instances, they wanted absolutely on premises. And so they had to go into a whole build out of not the code, but how to run an instance of a big LLM, because you want an LLM with enough parameters to come up with, valuable answers. But they had to build it in-house, and they wanted to see how can they start it on their own data service. So they ran into the whole questions of how to deploy it, how do you run it, how can it be fast if you only have a few machines, and how many machines do you need to deploy it to, et cetera, et cetera. So the concrete cases are interesting because they get it slightly different every single time. If the more your vertical has special things such as, absolute confidentiality or speed requirements, or, it gets even murkier with the accuracy, for example. If you need mission critical things that need to be accurate, and people keep trying with LLMs and they keep falling a little bit flat, it will get better, but it's interesting how the choices are a little bit different. So the ways to select the AI implementation paths, I find are slightly different than before, basically, which is super interesting.
I completely concur, and as well, we're kind of operating in an AI hype as well, right?
Yeah,
So there
that's
is
true.
a lot of pressure to kind of show the value of this thing AI from stakeholders and owners and even customers, right? So usually, what I've seen at least as well is that yes, we kind of listed four options, right? And you can kind of look at them in isolation in a binary way where choose yes or no, but usually you kind of see a combination of those
Yeah,
options in play.
yeah,
Often you see the rent option as a way of showing value. All the while you kind of you either go for acquisition or you go for a build option where you start building a team, you start building the knowledge, you start building the technology infrastructure
yeah,
to deal with this at scale. But to show a value, you quite often see rent, borrow, whatever kind of gives you the time to market you need
yeah,
for
yeah.
the value. But you kind of concurrently kind of start up an internal process around that leads you to a build approach over time as you gain the knowledge using these
Super interesting. Yeah.
technologies.
I think the one thing I would mention just for build versus buy, to add this to the topic, is hiring, and the fact that if you decide to build and you realize that it's quite complex, what you want to do, the AI talent is quite difficult to come by these days as well. And so the depending on how, attractive your company is to young AI talent, for example, you may go into an option and then halfway down realize, well, in order to deliver this in within our own lifetimes, you probably have to move to a different model. And so this is just deserves a mention, I feel, because the poor recruiters are being told, hey, find us two AI experts, and they're going to, university recruiting events. They're going to meetups in some dingy bar and whatnot, and but it's hard to find, right? So worth a mention.
Exactly, yeah, and talent constraints are absolutely forming decisions as well in terms of
Yeah,
which
yeah.
approach to take. I
And
think it's
so,
yeah. So
yeah,
go ahead, Christian.
yeah.
Because
Where I
this.
wanted to go, if we're done with the build versus buy, I wanted to move on to independently, apologies, independently of whether you want to build or buy or rent or cobble it together with sticky tape. Independently of all of this, I find it's worth discussing the question of how can you make it successful within your company. And I mentioned earlier at the intro that many companies are falling flat at the moment. And so, how could you move into these projects in a way that lets you be successful? And I found that A, you start small is one of the tricks of the trade, so to speak. Because if you decide that AI is going to do this for you, doesn't mean that it's going to do it for you. You need to test on smaller samples, smaller use cases. You need to test with the users, which we'll talk about next time. And I find that the other thing that is striking me is that it's quite close to how we used to run innovation teams or growth teams that would go at a completely different speed than the rest of your company, and you'd need to integrate those teams and what they produce into the more the longer term streams. And how do you deal with this, basically? So these are thoughts that I think are important when you plan these projects. Otherwise, you risk of going down the path of what many companies have, what you read about at the moment, which is 90% of the AI projects are not resulting in anything. Do you have any thoughts?
See, I experienced the same, right? That companies kind of spin up initiatives. You have an exec saying, "I want 10 AI initiatives by Monday," and they kind of run off in opposite directions, right? It has to be purposeful. Your role as product leader is to kind of bring in that purpose and bring in that clear-mindedness in terms of why are you driving initiatives. You as a leader, you have to stay close to it to make sure that it doesn't they don't spawn off in directions that are not useful to you in terms of your strategic focus. but you kind of want to spin off and drive initiatives that kind of take you to a step in terms of a step of exploration in the direction you think you're going with AI, and kind of that exploration kind of inform your decision that around whether that is something you should scale to, or you should go
Yeah.
another direction. So I think you should treat it as a way of kind of drawing up that a map of AI that you want to navigate from. It requires you close to it, that you don't hand the entire mandate down to a venture team set up to run by themselves. That's where they kind of pass off course. Um, but also in terms of how a setup like that works with an existing setup, let's call them the core teams. Um, how do they coexist? And Christian, I wonder, do you have any kind of tips and tricks in that regard in terms of how do you kind of create this peaceful coexistence? Or is it not
Yes.
peaceful just by default? I don't know.
There's always tension, but I think for me in the AI piece in general, so I'm not talking about, the super bleeding edge of AI, but in the bringing AI into regular use cases, into business use cases, I find what's interesting is there's two or three aspects, but the biggest ones for me are um, A, to put a framework so that you as a leader help the company and the teams put a framework around the AI to say, fine, we'll break it up into small experiments, but let's see what the AI can do. But let's also be sure to know what is our threshold for accepting this as an interesting value going forward. So, for example, if it does something great, but then fails every third time, that's a bit difficult for you to manage as a company on a static, on a stable basis, because that means you need a test harness and a readjustment harness around to say, well, when it goes wrong, what do we do? So you need a framework, I think, and as a leader, you're very well placed to give this framework to people of quality, of speed, of value, of reliability, of whatever it is, right? And the second question is, how do these teams live with the others? And I think there, it's exactly like I did with growth teams or with innovation teams, that you have to be extremely clear about what the different teams' objectives are, what the time windows are, because if your time window is 1 or 2 weeks, it's very different than a 3 month, production stable production grade stable feature. So you need to be clear and upfront about this with people, and you need both teams to be incentivized correctly around those timelines and the results they're supposed to bring. And you need both sides to be accepting of that and working together. Because once you have a great innovation feature or a great AI feature, you need to productionize it. And that means that the teams that productionize things will take time to do this. So first, how can you accelerate that? Because you don't want to take 3 months to productionize an AI feature. But how can you accelerate it in a way that is stable for the rest of your infrastructure in terms of capabilities, authentication, like all the rest, right? Security, how is it embedded? How does the marketing work? How does support work? And can they even answer questions when customers call about that? There's lots of implications. And so for me, it's very, very near to the innovation slash growth, basically.
Completely agree. And I think back to these kind of four options you have, and as you're considering around how you want to implement your
Yeah.
your strategy around AI and your products, is that ask yourself, what is the priority? Is it time to market? Is it in
Yep.
that regard to show value fast? Uh, or is it to build something, or is the focus kind of more long term to say that there's a patience in the company you work for to kind of wait for AI value to arrive as long as it's built in a sustainable way?
Yeah.
Um, there's kind of start with that and kind of understand what are the expectations, what are the requirements, and then quite often, the option, whether it's buy, build, borrow, and so forth,
Yeah. Yeah.
is will give itself in that regard, and it's usually a combination of multiple approaches in that regard. Um,
Cool. So as with everything else, think about what you want to achieve
mm.
as a goal, not as an exact spec, but as a goal, and then build the framework around to be able to achieve these goals within the teams with small steps one after the other. I guess that's probably a safe way to apply, basically, to get the best results.
Exactly, and do it all with this kind of mindfulness and be back to that, right? Because if your option is to go and rent, like buy a service in the market, but you want to own it as a core competency over time and as an in-housing it, ensure to connect how can you utilize that you are renting
Yeah.
in market with growing the competency level within your line organization to kind of take it on over time at the right time. So look at it in the
Yeah.
synergy as a holistic synergy and kind of be mindful around how it works together
Yeah.
and where you eventually want to end up.
Great. Thank you. So I think
Thank
we
you.
covered the use cases last time. We covered, okay, now we know where we want to go. How do we do it today? And we're looking forward to the next episode and we'll tackle, okay, great, you've launched your AI features, but how do you even measure them? How do you deal with the customers? Do they know what to expect? Do they understand how to use your software? So we'll deal with that part next time. And so thanks, Jonas.
Thank you, Christian.
And
And as always, yeah, as always, if you have ideas, feedback, questions, bring them to us. We'll pick them up in an episode, talk to them, and generally, we'd just love to hear from you. So thank you
great.
very much for
And
listening.
sign up, share. We're grateful. And hopefully this was useful for everyone.